Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is Healthcare Thought Leadership, my LinkedIn live show. I am Marion Spears Carr, and I'm always excited to be with you on Fridays at 12:30 Eastern to interview someone in my network. This is a show, if this is the first time you've ever seen it, this is a show I created about a year ago where I wanted to really just bring the people of my network and share these amazing thought leaders and a lot of different topics with you and beyond, and with my network and beyond. And today I'm just more than honored and probably a little giddy about today's topic. This is very selfish in some ways for me. And just so excited to have our guest today. This is Gary Gute. He is the professor of the School of Applied Human Sciences and director of Uniflow Lab at the University of Northern Iowa. And Gary is a flow expert and a flow enthusiast, and someone who I got to meet and through my enthusiasm and connection with the old concept of flow. And today's topic is flow at work, the influence of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And Gary, welcome to the show. And I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more. And let's set the table for those people who might not understand what flow theory or flow psychology is. And then maybe also jump in and share how you got to know the gentleman who I got to work with for an extended period of time. The gentleman I had to call Dr. C because my Southern accent butchered his name so much. Gary, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Well, thank you, Marion. I'm great. Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. And by the way, your pronunciation a moment ago was perfect.
I have practiced.
There you go.
I've practiced a lot since I met him. The first time years ago.
Name. All right. Okay. Great. Well, thank you. This is great. Wonderful to be able to do this with you, and hopefully some people will, those who are watching, will enjoy and the experience and get a lot out of it, and hopefully we can do some good along the way. So yeah, my name's Gary Gute, and talk a little bit about what flow is, I guess, first, and then I'll talk about my connection to Mike and to the work on flow. So flow is an experience, and I like to think of it as an experience rather than a state. You will sometimes see that, but I like to think of it as an experience that we have when we are completely engaged with all of our being in something that we love, a task, an activity that we love for its own sake at a high level of challenge. So it's not because it's easy. There's a level of challenge that's required for us, and hopefully, ideally, our level of skill for meeting that will be commensurate with that level of challenge for us, or the challenge might be a little bit over our heads. But in that state of flow, where there is a very clear goal for what you want to accomplish when you're engaged in that activity, and a clear sense of the sub goals along the way to get to that ultimate goal. And there is a balance of challenge and skill that I just mentioned, and there's immediate feedback. You know right away as you're doing the activity if you're doing well. If you're not doing so well, you're such an expert that you know how you're doing, and you can self-correct if you need to, or you can do more of the same if things are really going well. But in that moment, and that moment can last for several minutes, could even last for a few hours potentially, there's an experience where all of your attention is so completely focused on what you're doing at this high level of skill, where many people describe it as time is distorted. Hours may pass as if they're minutes. Sometimes it goes in the other direction, but usually it's a lot of time will pass as if it's a short period of time. Self-consciousness disappears. You're no longer thinking about what you look like and what people are thinking of you and all this kind of self-critical stuff, that burdens us so often. And you love the experience for its own sake. And there is almost this pure experience in the moment of doing what you're doing. And it can be a remarkable experience. And when Mike started studying this, he was not thinking about business. He wasn't even thinking about education. He was curious. He wanted to understand just the concept and the experience of enjoyment. what do people in their daily lives, in their regular lives, living their sometimes very mundane kinds of lives,
Mm-hmm.
where do they experience enjoyment? And he was teaching a seminar. It was his first teaching job after he had graduated from the University of Chicago. He took a position at Lake Forest College, north of Chicago, and was teaching a seminar on, of all things, play, and not play in children, but adult play. What
Mm-hmm.
adults do with their time when they really enjoy what they're doing, things like rock climbing, basketball playing, a number of things, and was teaching this seminar on play. And that really is where, even though there had been a lot of life experiences for Mike that had shaped
Mm-hmm.
this, that's where things really started to gel and the theory really took shape back in the mid to late 1960s. And then since then, over the last several decades, just remarkable things have happened. It has grown exponentially in ways, both the theory and the application, in ways that Mike never anticipated, that Mihaly
Mm-hmm.
never anticipated. And the amount of good, the kind of good that it's doing for individual lives, for systems, for businesses, for schools is astounding. So there's great good that can come from understanding and building a life, around flow. So we'll be able to talk a little bit about that with some specificity today, I hope. My experience, real briefly, with my introduction to flow
Mm-hmm.
happened, and I think this is fitting, when I was teaching a class a number of years ago, back in the mid 90s, on organizational behavior, and was talking to the class about theories of intrinsic motivation,
Mm-hmm.
in particular job design, how to design work so that people find meaningful experiences and being autonomous within the work. They get immediate feedback. They're responsible for a complete piece of work, a number of different dimensions that are necessary there. And one of the students said, well, this sounds a lot like flow. And I didn't know what flow was at that point. And he reached into his backpack and he pulled out a copy of the original publication of flow that looked like this, looks
Yep.
like this, and started telling me about flow. And Mike at that point was still at Chicago and was going to be there for a number of years before I would ultimately meet him. And the student was absolutely right. He was dead on. And at that point, I went out, I bought the copy of the book Flow, read that book, read Mike's book Creativity, and got familiar with his work. And then through a series of just remarkable serendipitous events, the odds of this happening are just so remotely, just almost impossible. Mike and I were able to meet, and then we worked together for the bulk of a semester, and then for a number of years, thereafter. So it's been, and he really is someone who has, and I'll be quiet here in a minute. I just want to say, to give proper, give him his due. For me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, he changed how I think, he changed how I work, he changed how I use my time. And I think most important, he changed how I relate to others. So through his example. So
You and I
long
have
question.
amazing shared experience there, and I put up on the screen for those of you who are watching live. And by the way, if you're watching live or you watch the replay, please post in the comments where you're watching. Let us know that you're there. If you have questions for Gary during this subject around flow, please put them in the comments. Let us know you're there. I know you're watching. I know there's people online right now. Please let us know. And these are my copies, if you will, of the two books that you mentioned. A little bit later addition to the book that you held up. And the book on the right, The Creativity, was the one that actually, and matter of fact, I have it right here, is from his desk in Claremont, California. And one of the things I love about this book, Gary, you and I are talking about it offline. You and I are both coffee drinkers. And I couldn't remember if I called him Dr. C, but I couldn't remember if he was a coffee drinker or if this was maybe tea, but it was coffee stained, and I love that. And it's one of my prized possessions. And so it's I got to jump in here to tell you about, and you and I've talked about my shared experience with you in this regard. I came out of, or I spent my whole career has been in the executive search space, but also organizational development, leadership development work. I've been very interested and fascinated in the work of behavioral psychology and how it applies to the work environment, coaching, leadership development, team development, et cetera. So I've been on this kind of long journey throughout my career in studying the work of a lot of different people. I was very much influenced by Eric Fromm's work and Michael Maccabee's work on leadership and strategic intelligence. One of my other influences, a guy named Elias Porter. And similar to your situation where that student said, "Hey, that sounds like flow." I also came out of the extreme sports world. I was a competitive cyclist and a mountain biker and a competitive downhill skateboard racer for a lot of years. And a lot of people misunderstood my involvement in that from the perspective of they saw me as an adrenaline junkie, right? That's how they framed it. You must be an adrenaline junkie. And one day I was in a conversation with someone. We were talking about these sports and all in the research that I do and the reading that I do and all these different things. Because when I get into something, I'm all in. And I was saying, no, it really isn't necessarily adrenaline. That's a positive, right? That's fun. That's a good feeling or whatever. But I said, it's the hyper focus that I crave. And I'm a brain injury survivor. So focus is a challenge for me. And that person that I was talking to did the exact same thing as that student. And they said, well, that sounds like flow. And I'm like, well, okay, what's flow? And just like you, became really curious, went and found his book. And in exact same storyline, in a sense to you, realized that there was this huge connection with flow and how I saw the world and what I wanted to learn. And I saw a connection between his work and the work of Elias Porter's around relational awareness theory. I sent him an email at Claremont Graduate University. And I never expected Dr. C to respond, but he did. And he said, well, if you're ever in California, I'd love to talk to you about this work you're doing and this conversation. And that's where the relationship started. And I've been honored to get, not to spend as much time as you did. I'm not an academic, but a lot of different times over the last, really until he passed away in 2021, over the last 15 years, really roughly. And all the same things you said, it changed how I looked at my work. It changed how I looked at and thought, and also how I saw people. So that's fantastic. So we've got a couple of people checking in. Laverne Hamilton's checking in from Hampton, Georgia. Paul Barkley's checking in from Milledgeville, Georgia. Got to meet Paul and see Paul yesterday at a meeting. Gary, let's talk about this idea around how flow might have a context in our work. I love the fact that two things you said. A lot of stuff you said, it was great, but one of the things that you said was this focus of enjoyment. And let's face it, sometimes work's not that enjoyable. It's not that enjoyable. But for people who choose careers and get to have an opportunity to kind of evaluate the work that they do, how does flow, or at least the pursuit of flow, come into play in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad that it's the next question. We could spend a lot of time just on that question, teasing that apart. But I think before I attempt to comment on what you're asking here, Marion, I'd first like to share that some of the early research that Mike did and his lab when he was still at Chicago did on the experience of flow at work was very revealing. Initially, the early work was interviews, interviewing rock climbers, interviewing basketball players, surgeons, and motorcycle gang members, and all kinds of people. Then later, he developed a method called experience sampling method that I'm sure a number of people who are joining us are familiar with, so that we could measure the individual's experience pretty much in real time, when and where they were experiencing flow. And one of the early findings, and this was replicated by many other studies over the next several years, is that people were, he called it the paradox of work, that people were reporting experiencing more flow at work than they were, in fact, in their leisure activities.
Oh, wow.
Seems counterintuitive, people wanting, finish work, get to the weekend, retire, get on with the rest of your life, because all this, the drudgery of work and the stress and all that is getting in the way, and then you want to have fun. But people were reporting experiencing more flow, this complete focus on something that you love for its own sake, balance of challenge and skill, immediate feedback, clear goals, and then the feeling part of the experience that comes with it at work than at leisure. But even though that was the case, they reported that when they were at work, on average, they'd rather be doing something else. They were experiencing more flow at work than at leisure, but they'd rather be doing something else than being at work. And that has, for a long time, puzzled a lot of us. And my wife, Anne, has a theory, which we need to test. Her best guess, and I think it's a very good one, is that it's not so much the work itself that people are troubled with. A lot of people really like the work in their jobs.
Yeah.
It's all of the other stuff. It's all of the environmental stuff. It's the bureaucracy. It's perhaps colleagues. It's policies. It's all of the roadblocks. It's all of the things that get in the way from your ability to really have a full, meaningful experience doing something that's really meaningful to you in the workplace. So that's an issue that needs to be explored, and we need to collect some data to check into that hypothesis. But that continues to be the case. People, even in more recent research, people do enjoy their work. They do experience flow at work, but they'd rather be doing something else. So it is a paradox that we need to explore. It's, Gallup, this comes to mind. Every year they do a big study, release the result of the previous year's study on the experience of work and well-being in the workplace, and job satisfaction is a part, and engagement in particular, I guess, is the variable that they're primarily looking at. And the numbers aren't good. That about a third of the people at the most, at least in the US, are engaged in their work.
And that number's going down. Yeah, I just saw the research recently. Yeah.
It's not good at all. Yeah. And I think a big part of that is because they're not experiencing nearly as much flow as they could. And if they knew what flow was, as they probably like to, in the workplace, they may not have the vocabulary, but they know that what they're experiencing right now is not giving them engagement, that it's not working for them. And a part of this, I think, getting to your question here, is that most jobs are not well designed for flow. In fact, they're designed for other things. They're designed for efficiency. They're not designed for people to have control over a complete, meaningful piece of work. They're not designed so that people are able to completely focus their attention without all of the distractions that are coming at us all of the time, in the workplace. And a lot of jobs are just not well defined. There are a lot of issues. So the workplace, in many ways, the culture of work is getting in the way, unfortunately, of people experiencing a lot of flow, as much flow as they would like in the workplace. And part of the solution is, if there's not going to be cultural change, and that's the hard thing to be able to influence, is that we as individuals need to find ways of experiencing more flow. Unfortunately, it's on us to be able to experience more flow in the workplace if the culture of the larger environment isn't going to make that available to us very easily.
A lot to unpack there, and I think we could do a whole we could do a whole show on it. Yeah, I know, Gary. You and I, poor Gary. When I call him, for those of you who are watching the show, when I call Gary, it's like an avalanche of thoughts that he has to manage of me. So, but one of the things, Gary, that is so important. There's a couple key things. There's a lot of key things you said, but there's a couple key things for leaders. Most of my audience are leaders or emerging leaders. Think about what are the conditions that we can create and the barriers that we can remove so that we have a probability of flow for the people we want to lead. Laverne's got a really good point here, and I want to bring it up. And if you have comments, please put them in the comments and let's have a dialogue. My show is about us talking together.
There you go.
She goes, she's making a point. That's exactly what she was thinking. She goes, I've walked away from jobs that I thoroughly enjoyed because of the extra stuff that was too much. And that, so as leaders, if we think about creating an environment that's not only productive, but fulfilling, I mean, culturally, that's critically important. But one of the things, and you said, and I want to go back in a moment to talk about how we have an individual responsibility as well. But as leaders, talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we can do. Flow can't be manufactured, but the conditions where flow might happen can be managed. So I would love for you to talk about that a little bit, Gary.
Sure. And I will, but I think more value than what I can say is that if people want to check out Fligbee, this is not a commercial, it's not a plug for a product, but Mike was intimately involved in developing a gaming simulation with some friends of ours in Budapest. The game is called Fligbee, and it's just at fligbee.com, Fligby. Flow is good business for you. It's a gaming simulation that teaches people within organizations how to build environments for flow, because it really is a matter of, I think, what you're asking about, Mary, and the answer to that, part of the answer to that is building environments where the organization can provide opportunities for people to experience flow. And by having, part of the answer is having a clearly defined job, making for the people working at the organization, eliminating as much as possible these environmental distractions that we talked about earlier and that Laverne has experienced as well. Create jobs so that people have as much autonomy as possible, so that they're responsible for a larger piece of work than just a very small piece of work. Although it is possible to turn, Mike argued, and I think he's right, that you can turn almost any job into, or any experience into, a flow experience. If you find the challenge within it and find the skill to meet that challenge, you can work on variables such as time and number of other things in order to experience more flow, even on an assembly line, kind of a position, which might not be seen as a responsibility for a large piece of work. Removing many of the blockers, to flow that get in the way from people to, be able to have a pure experience with their work that they're doing. So there are a lot of things that can be done. I just want to mention real briefly, but checking out Fligbee, I think will cover a lot of ground and teach people a lot in a very short period of time. One thing I'll mention is a study that I just became familiar with a few days ago, done by some colleagues of mine at the University of Iowa and their business college. And they were studying not flow, but studying people within organizations, managers within organizations, comparing those who are highly agentic, those who really want to take on new challenges, those who are excited by new possibilities and solving new problems, or identifying new problems and solving new problems, the kind of people that we'd like to have,
exactly,
have within organizations. But they compared people of that profile with those who are just much more the rule followers, people who do what they're told, keep their heads down, and do their thing, and aren't going to aren't motivated to solve problems. Well, what they found over time is that group that is much more agentic and much more problem solving of a group, they're much less likely to stay within the organization. They're more likely to get frustrated, more likely to feel like they're being hemmed in, more likely to feel like they're not being appreciated, and are more likely to leave. I don't know if this was part of Laverne's motivation, but to leave that organization, because organizations don't. I think this is where flow fits in. I think for the most part are not very interested in creating that kind of an environment where people can experience a lot of flow, because it does require, it's a big commitment, and it's a commitment from the top down to really make this work. There are organizations, you can read about it in Mike's book, Good Business, which is one of Mike's best books. Subtitle is Leadership Flow and the Making of Meaning. There are a number of organizations that have really worked hard to integrate the principles and practices of flow seamlessly throughout the organization, and report experiencing great results because of that.
And I put on the screen for you, for people watching, the link to Fligbee. And Fligbee is an absolutely fascinating game that's set in a winery, and you play this game. For those of you who are watching, you play this game as the new general manager of the winery. And when it's completed, and again, neither one of us are selling this to you, but this is a great way to connect Dr. C's work to the work environment. You get a report around your leadership style and around as it relates to creating these conditions that we're talking about. And it's a really fascinating game, and you mentioned off air that recently you guys were published an article. Tell us about that article that people might could find as well that's talking about this very thing.
Oh yeah, it was just Marion and I were speaking about this before the show here. So Hewlett Packard HP has a publication. It's 4 times a year, I believe, publication called Innovation, and Zad in Budapest and Deanne and I and a number of others were interviewed for a story on flow. And I will send you the link here right now.
Yeah, send it to me and we'll add it and we'll put it in the comments.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
But it's a great little story on flow at work.
Yeah, it is. So one of the areas that one of the ways that I'm using these concepts, Gary, I'd love to talk a little bit about that. You and I have talked about it off air. Is my work? I do. For those of you who don't know, I run a company's medical healthcare search practice called Comor Partners. We do executive search in a lot of different verticals. I manage the healthcare practice and life sciences practice, and we work with executive leaders searches all over and board searches all over the country, and really now all over the world. But another piece of my work is helping these same companies have highly effective leadership teams. And one of the things that we've been working on is this idea around how do we connect the people that we're trying to lead into these kind of experiences and conditions. And we're probably going to have another show to talk about it because we're almost out of time. But one of the things that the flow experience says is that we're not in flow when the challenge is much greater than the skills and capabilities that we own, or the challenge is much less than the skills and capabilities that we own. Both of those put us in either a state of anxiety or a state of apathy. And one of my connections around flow was this idea around being in conflict when we're not using the skills that we own the most. Gary, I'd love for you just to speak to that for just a moment around how can we identify situations where we're not going to be in flow. We've talked about the conditions from a leader, but you talked about individual responsibility. I'd love for you to speak to that. And wow, I can't believe we're already at 27 minutes. Gary, I knew we would talk too long.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'll just take a moment here. I'm trying to find a way to send you here in the chat. I'm not seeing it. This link. Can you tell me how to do that, Marion?
Yeah, there's a click over there that says private chat. If you'll click that private chat on the right side and put it right there, I can copy it. Put it in
that's what I thought, but it's not.
That's all right. I'll find it. We'll put it in the comments.
Okay, there we go. There we go. I just wanted people to have it today while they're here, but that's great. They can check there.
We will do that.
I think that just one of many ways that we can have individually, we can have some control, to create some control over our environment, is to do what we can to get rid of the distractions or to minimize the distractions. You know, it's said that we live in the best time that there's ever been to live. You know, that we have all of the conveniences and all of the luxuries and everything we could ever want. And I suppose that's true, but everything comes with a trade-off. You know, there's never any kind of a pure gain. We give something up, you know, for that. And I think even though we might materially live in the best time that we could ever live, I think one of the great costs is what it does for us is that the time we live in is exacting a terrible toll upon our attention, ability to be attentive, to be focused on things that we're doing. We're being sabotaged by things around us, by ourselves and by things around us that are vying for our attention all of the time. But creating a work environment where it is, if you can, where it's just you and the work that you're doing and nothing else, so that you're able to immerse yourself in that experience. Because I think we have kind of a tortured experience with experience.
Yes.
We've gotten to the point where we thrive upon all of this stuff and all of the chaos and all the entropy that it creates coming at us, so that we're not able to have the kind of a pure experience that is necessary, that's essential to experiencing flow. And one of the things we can do is create environments that are less distracting and where it's just you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, one of my goals for 2023 was to do that very thing. Matter of fact, the books that I'm reading in my book challenge for this year are around, so far I've been around focus, I'm reading a book called Hyper Focus, which is a really interesting book. And a couple of other those things to try to figure out what are the distractions, what are the situations that are impeding the condition for me to be fully engaged, fully focused, and fully connected. Gary, we're out of time, and I know we're going to have to come back. You're going to have to come back. And for those of you who are watching, please let us know in the comments if you'd love to have more conversations about flow. How can people get in touch with you, Gary?
Sure. Glad you asked. They can email me, just gary.gute@uni, the letters uni.edu. The link is, I believe, on the LinkedIn page as well.
It is.
So, or just send a message on LinkedIn. That's great. I'd love to hear you. You can also check out our website, theflowchannel.com, that Deanne and Mihaly and I developed a few years ago to advance my work. Theflowchannel.com.
Flowchannel.com. And
make sure you get the in there.
But,
there's only one. Right?
There's only one, yeah, and I'll put that in the comments as well.
Okay,
Gary, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you, Marion. This is great. Time went, definitely a flow experience, at least for me, and hopefully
it was a flow experience for me.
And thank you because time sure did fly by, and it was great fun.
Absolutely. And for those of you watching, this is Healthcare Thought Leadership, your LinkedIn live show every Friday at 12:30, where I interview people in my network, share them with my network. I'm sharing these amazing thought leaders in my network, with my network and beyond. If you have a subject or a topic you'd love for us to cover on the show, please DM me. If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, please do so. I'm Marion Spears-Carr. Have a great Friday. And let's see, people checking in. Laverne saying, great discussion. Paul Barkley, thanks for sharing lunch with us. Paul's a hospital executive in Georgia. And for those of you who are watching, please share and like and share this with your network. Have a great day.